Welcome to You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton, and we're here with our resident expert, Dr. Ernest Rogers of Maplewood Animal Hospital, and we discuss a broad range of pet issues on this show. Let's discuss, for this show, the human-animal bond with children. Would you introduce our special guest, Dr. Rogers?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Mr. Horton. We have today Dr. Mark Lowenthal, who is a psychologist, a D-Psych.
A PsyD.
PsyD, got the words all wrong, who deals with families, adults, and children. He's local, and he deals with all kinds of issues with families and children. And so we're going to start looking at how pets can fit into a family, how pets can help children, and other issues. Dr. Lowenthal, can you give me some idea of the scope of your practice?
Sure. So I have a practice right in Maplewood, and I see sort of a range of ages, starting from, latency age children, 8, 9, 10, up through, adolescents, young adults, and into adulthood, families, couples, so a range.
So you cover the whole gamut.
The whole gamut. I probably don't see a lot of senior citizens, although as I get closer to that age, I wonder about that.
So what are some of the challenges of special needs children?
Well, special needs children may have special needs in a number of areas. It could be educationally. They may have learning disabilities. It could be related to their emotional development. It sort of depends on whether it's affecting them at school, affecting them at home with their family, affecting them with peers. So, depending on what the issues are, you're trying to help them to, I think, understand themselves and their strengths and limitations and how they can best cope with whatever they've been dealt with, and helping their family to help them as well.
How much is communication part of a family when there's disrupted communication, or the child, for whatever reason, for a disability, can't communicate? How does that fit into this whole family dynamic?
Well, I think it can have a tremendous impact, and I think understanding what the child's issues are and their limitations, particularly if it's around communication, it's really important, because I think sometimes the parents really need to understand and learn, what's going on and why their child is doing what they're doing. I think sometimes there's really unrealistic expectations of some of these kids, and that can create a tremendous amount of tension and sort of blaming. If you feel like your kid is not doing well in school because they're just lazy, or they're not trying, when in fact maybe there's some real issues getting in the way, and they're trying as hard as they can, but if they keep being told they're lazy, they're not going to continue to try.
And they don't know how to communicate that back to the parents, right? Reflect that back to the parents.
And especially if they have limitations with their ability to communicate,
Right.
They may just shut down or withdraw or act out.
What are some of the challenges facing the modern family in today's society?
I think there's a lot of challenges. It's tough, and I think just the pressure kids are under is really different than it was when we were younger. In school or even their schedules. I mean, kids have so much going on, and I think that puts a lot of stress on them. And I think there's obviously controversy about whether or not it's better for kids to have such busy schedules, or if they really need more free time to sort of create their own ways of entertaining themselves. I think that's a big source of stress. And then just pressure, high school pressure, college concerns, career concerns, financial concerns. I think they all weigh on families in a way that is significant.
And then we have blended families, which puts another level of, I don't want to say stress, but puts another level of need into the picture of what's going on when you have a blended family, whether it's an adopted child or a mixed marriage, a mixed race marriage, gay marriages. We can have all kinds of problems, or not problems, but concerns that come up when other people are looking in. And that's a necessary stress, I think, in this day and age that we didn't see, at least when I was a child.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, well, we used to just get on our wagon and make the horses take us to where we had to go.
So how can pets change the family dynamic for both good and bad, given all the stresses today?
Well, I think, pets, for most people that have pets, I think they do feel like they're members of the family. And I think that they can have a tremendous impact, positively in a lot of cases when it may be someone, I'm thinking of teenagers that I work with. They don't really want to talk to their parents sometimes. They don't really feel like they can relate to anybody in their family, but the pet, the dog or whatever, is sort of the person that they feel most connected to. And so that can be a critical thing. It can go in the other direction too. I mean, it can be, stressful if a pet isn't trained or a family's under tremendous stress, it's they're not able to sort of attend to the pet. So, there's a lot of different ways it can affect a family.
Well, given the holiday season, what kind of stresses can affect a family?
Well, again, I think people are busy. They feel like there's so much they have to get done. There's expectations, sort of pleasing the kids.
Financial stress to be able to
yeah.
give everyone everything they want, I guess,
Sure.
is part of it.
And sort of create the kind of holiday season that they sort of think their kids should have, or that they once had, or once wished they had, So I think there's a lot of different aspects to it.
And I guess the pets fall into this and add another level of need in a family where, okay, the kids are going to get this, and what do we do with the pets? We're having visitors and...
Oh yeah. Well, there's a lot of excitement around the holidays, and there's often, people staying in the house that are normally not there, and I think that can affect, the animals. Hopefully they're sociable and, they're going to do well with it, but some pets get very stressed, I think, as a result of some of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can look at it that pets don't have to be dogs and cats. I mean, I see people come in with rabbits and gerbils and guinea pigs, snakes. People come in with snakes. Now, in the end, I guess that's a tool for communication or a tool to bond with. It doesn't really matter what the animal is. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it just depends on how the family relates to the animal. A snake would be an interesting addition to a Christmas dinner, like for some.
Right beside the French fries,
Right,
yeah.
right. Aunt Esther may not be so happy about
Yeah,
that.
that's right.
How do family stresses affect the care of pets?
Well, very significantly, I think. And I think one of the things that we were talking about before the show was how, where a family's at and what's going on with them can have a tremendous impact on how they handle the pet and whether they should even have the pet. I think that if there's a tremendous amount of, conflict in a family and a lot of yelling and screaming, that's going to affect a pet. And it can manifest in different ways. I just had a kid recently tell me they thought because of all the fighting the parents were doing that, the dog thought that they were playing, but what it sounded to me as he was describing it sounded like a very agitated dog who actually was aggressive, and I wonder how much it was reacting to what it was witnessing and observing.
Can a dog play a positive role in that situation?
I think so for the kids, for sure. Sort of almost like a refuge from what might be going on in the rest of the family. But
So how would the kids interact with the pets? What would you expect? You don't know for sure, but...
I guess the hope would be that it would feel like someone that they can turn to who would pay attention to them when they're feeling maybe that the adults aren't paying attention to them or bond with or cuddle with. I guess it depends on...
Non-judgmental?
Yeah, sort of accepting member of the family who, gives that unconditional love,
So let's turn to some specific childhood conditions and whether they're appropriate for injecting a pet into the family. How does a child with ADHD respond to a pet companion?
Could you describe what ADHD
Sure.
is in the spectrum?
It stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, and you hear about it a lot these days because there are a lot of kids being diagnosed with it. I think there's some controversy about if it's being overdiagnosed. These kids tend to, there's two versions of it. One which includes the hyperactivity, and those kids tend to be the ones that get in trouble when they're in second and third grade because they have so much energy.
That was me.
That was you, yeah, okay. And
Absolutely.
they can be very impulsive. But there's another version which is without hyperactivity, and those kids just tend to have more issues with attention, and so they have trouble paying attention. They're very distractible. They can also have poor frustration tolerance. But in either case, I think a pet can be a wonderful thing for a kid like that. But with the hyperactive kid, they might be very inclined to just be very high energy and get a pet very worked up, which, depending on the pet, can have different results.
Get a large dog that likes to run and run.
It could be great. Right?
That could be good.
Yeah.
So I guess the type of animal you get also would make a difference depending within the spectrum of ADHD.
Yeah.
It could make a difference, be a positive, or I guess you're saying it could even be a negative.
I think it could. It used to be called Asperger's syndrome. It's not used so much anymore, but it still describes a certain kind of kid who may have a little trouble, making good eye contact, relating to, to peers. They can be more anxious, and on the further end of the spectrum, they have trouble really connecting to humans at all. So, I think on both ends, I think a pet can be a tremendous addition. It's going to depend. I mean, on the extreme end, it may not be verbal, so that brings up other issues. But I think for a lot of kids on the spectrum, an animal can be a very positive addition because they can really connect. I mean, kids can sometimes connect to animals in a way they can't connect with their own family.
How about Down syndrome?
Down syndrome, there's again a tremendous range, so it would depend where someone would fall, but I think that often the case they have a lot of love and affection. Sometimes adults or other kids in their lives may have trouble with how affectionate they may be, but again, pets sometimes will eat it up, and it can be a wonderful thing, and again, an ally, for that child, and again, if they're on the more extreme end, you have to worry about, how much can they understand, a pet's needs, vulnerabilities, so it isn't always going to be a good match.
And then as a veterinarian, I know that there are many different personalities within the pet spectrum, and so that has to be considered when you're looking at a pet. I don't think you can just go for one pet or another. You really should discuss this among the family and understanding the pet itself.
Okay, well, we have to take a break, and after the break, we'll continue this discussion. This is You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton, and we will be right back.
After 17 years working as a mason, Mike was laid off. I met him when he came into the library looking for help. He found a job opening, but the application was only online. Mike said he'd spent his entire life around tools, but had never used a computer. I showed him how, and he ended up applying for numerous jobs online. I saw Mike the other day. His new computer skills paid off. He's working again.
New Jersey libraries are transforming lives. Tell us your story.
We're back with You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton, and we're here with Dr. Ernest Rogers and our guest. And let's change our focus now to how the pet can improve the family through times of crisis. We recently had a show on pet loss and bereavement. Can you suggest to our viewers how to deal with pet loss and discuss this subject with children?
Well, it's a big issue because if you're going to have a pet, at some point you're going to deal with the fact that they may not be there, and I think depending on the age of the child and the connection the child has with the pet, it can be a pretty devastating thing, as it can be for adults too. I mean, but how you deal with it with a child is different because their ability to understand death varies tremendously with age and other issues. So, I think you do have to be careful, especially if it's a situation in which the pet has to be put to sleep. You don't want to use that expression with young children because it can have, they're very suggestible, and I think it can have all kinds of negative ramifications. You also want to help them understand, the fact that it was done for the animal because they were suffering or they were going to be suffering. It wasn't done because the doctor was being cruel or anything like that.
And then the parents have to be able to deal with their grief to help the children. So do you have a spectrum within that realm of, parents can grieve as much as a child for the pet, and often, well, in my experience, often more because they understand it more.
Yeah. And it's sort of similar to like a loss of another family member. I think it's often very important for the child to know that it's okay to express their feelings, to be able to talk about the pet, that it's not something that should be just buried under the rug. But that can be difficult for the adult too, because the kid may want to talk about it all the time, and it can be very hard. It can trigger a lot of stuff. So it's a difficult thing to get through, and I think other people in their lives may not appreciate how difficult it is that they love, even if it's not a dog or a cat, even if it's the pet gerbil or hamster. It can be a very significant thing for a child.
And so when you're dealing with people like that, how do you get them to move ahead? As a psychologist, as a therapist, do you have a structure within which you work? Or is it just person comes, you have a discussion, and you feel it out?
It's more the latter, I'd say, for at least for the way I work. I think you really want to try to figure out where the person is at and try to help them to be able to verbalize it or express it in whatever way they can. With children, it's not just verbally. Sometimes it'll be, drawing or through play. So, you want to help them to express where they're at and their feelings directly or indirectly.
And so it's a family matter.
Oh, for sure.
How can a pet help a child with physical disabilities?
Well, I think that, there can be a lot of positives, a lot of benefits to that. You were mentioning a situation which I thought was really interesting about.
There are a number of people that we see, and I'm sure everyone's seen this on the internet, or many people have seen it on the internet, but there are a number of dogs that have been born without hind legs, without front legs. And recently there were a number of videos on the on Facebook, I guess, where a dog without front legs was put in a carriage and was getting along, and had a friend who was a little child without legs, and they sort of bonded over that mutual disability, and they were able to move ahead and enjoy each other's company. And look, if he can do it, I guess I can do it. And so I think a lot of times, not that I've had that situation in my clinic, but I think a lot of times we see where we have a dog with a disability, people tend to be more empathetic. They tend to recognize that if he can do it, I can do it. I just got to put effort into it. And so it can be a motivating force as well, is what I've seen. Although many of the people, I don't have anyone who comes into my clinic that's disabled as of yet, but the people who are able and see the dog being able to do things seem to have a spark, and they want to move ahead.
So how can pets promote empathy with children?
I think it makes me think of what we were talking about earlier about the children on the autistic spectrum, who are, part of what goes with that often is a lack of a certain kind of empathy. But I think animals can be tremendous help, a tremendous amount of help in helping to develop empathy. They may have trouble reading social cues and sort of figuring out what their family members or peers are feeling, but I think they often can tune into dogs or cats, and even if they're not so on target, I think that they can sometimes appreciate, that and worry about, the dog may be hungry, or the dog seems tired, or, it's I think a way of helping them to build those skills.
And I think the dog, cat, gerbil will give them some kind of feedback. You go up to a gerbil's cage, it wants food, it'll sort of come up to the cage, and you sort of figure these cues out.
And I think kids with those kinds of issues sometimes can do better with animals than they can do with other people.
So how about a case of domestic abuse in a family? How do pets either help or hurt, or are helped or hurt themselves in that situation?
Well, I mean, I think that, it can be one of those situations which you worry about a family deciding to get a pet, because if that's going on. I mean, I think that, when there's those kind of serious problems in a family, you really wouldn't want to subject an animal to that if they're not already part of it. If they're already in there, you really, want to be concerned about how much they are affected. Are they going to get in the middle of it? Are they going to attack one of the members of the family? Or are they going to also be victimized? For a kid, it can be a tremendous resource to have a pet that they can turn to when that kind of dysfunction is going on in their family. But
Extricate themselves from the situation
yeah,
by interacting with the pet.
yeah, but it can be a difficult situation. And,
Especially when it's violent.
yeah.
And I've had at least one case, there may have been two, but there was at least one case where, as a forensic veterinarian, the person, a female, was murdered, was strangled to death, and the dog was found there also dead. And based on what the paramedics saw in the dogs initially, and what I found on necropsy, which is an autopsy on a dog, the dog was strangled also. And often we find in domestic violence, we find that the person who's being aggressive will kill the dog, kill the cat, stab the dog, stab the cat, kill the rabbit, kill the guinea pig or hamster to prove that he's serious. And so sometimes we can interject pets into a situation which we really don't want them to be in. But on the other hand, we have pets that allow the children to go to their bedroom and sit with their pet and not have to listen to the yelling and screaming.
Okay. How about children that are sort of discarded? How can pets be used for therapy with them?
Well, it's a growing field. I mean, the whole use of therapy animals and therapy dogs, and kids that have been neglected or abandoned, I think are often, one of the ways they've dealt with that kind of trauma is to disconnect and to, not let people in. And, sometimes animals, they will let in. And it's at least a way of beginning to allow themselves to connect and to trust. So it can be, can have a very therapeutic effect in those situations.
What about children with self-destructive behaviors?
Well, again, I think sometimes those kids, I mean, there's a big range, but, often they feel very alienated from others, from their family. They can't relate, or they feel like others can't relate to them. And,
What would you characterize as self-destructive behavior? I mean, we hear of the kids that cut themselves, but
Yeah.
the range, as you say, is great. So it goes from
it's
pulling out their hair
suicidal to, cutting themselves, burning themselves,
Drug abuse?
drinking drugs, to excess kind of thing. There's a lot of different ways it manifests itself, and but there's often a sense of isolation, and I think that's where a pet can really come in very handy. They can relate, they can connect in an unconditional kind of way that can really make a difference.
And are there physiological manifestations with this? With the depression, we know that some people can be chemically depressed, but are there physiological manifestations that you get by having a pet that are positive?
I don't know. I mean, I can't speak as an authority on that,
Right.
but I would think, just from my own experience,
Right,
that there
right.
definitely are. I mean, it seems to me that, the comfort that a pet can provide, I think, is and without words, which maybe is part of what the value is. You know, they don't have to say anything; they just have to be there and let you rub their tummy or, you know, scratch their ears, and, you know, or they'll lick you. You know,
Right.
as long as you let them. Sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, that can do a lot.
And in my experience, my dog has a sense for when I'm upset. And she'll come over and sit with me. And if she wants to play, she'll curtail it for that time. And if I want to go out, she'll want to play. When I get back to the hospital tonight, she'll be there jumping up and down, wanting to do something.
Yeah. As if she didn't see you this morning.
As if she didn't see me this morning. Yeah.
So what kinds of resources can people find for information about the appropriateness of a pet for their children?
Well, I think, you know, going to the people that they trust, like their pediatrician or their psychologist, if there's one in their family, minister, veterinarian, if they have. But I do think that especially if a family's struggling at a certain time, they really should talk to somebody before they get a pet. I think people sometimes do with pets what they do with kids, and they think it's going to fix everything, and that's not usually the case if there's a lot of, you know, problems or crises at a certain time. But you know, to get some input about the right age and, you know, the right type of pet, I think can be really important for a family.
And I really just want to interject a couple of comments here. I think every pet, whether it's a family that wants a pet just to have a pet, or whether it's a family that has issues, whether it's a blended family, a traditional family, a family with a single parents, I think every pet that comes into a family, an adult has to be responsible for that pet and be supervising that pet, take the responsibility for taking it to the veterinarian, making sure it gets out, making sure it gets fed. I think that's one very important point.
And be realistic about what kids are going to do for that pet. 'Cause
Right.
I think that's an issue that you hear about a lot. It's like,
Yeah.
well, you said you were going to walk it every
Yeah,
day,
yeah.
you know, 3 times a day.
Right. And that doesn't often happen. And then once you're sure about this, realize that a pet is a financial burden. Wait, I'm sorry, let me take that back. It's a financial commitment that can last up to 15, 16 years. So we have to be sure about that. And then finally, we have to make sure that any pet that comes into the house is well cared for in the sense of being in the house and given what it needs. And then finally, I think we're almost at the end. And I think I'd just like to say that if anyone has any questions about this show or any other show, they should feel free to contact me through email at maplewoodAH@comcast.net. And feel free to write me, email me, and I'm happy to help with that at any time. I can certainly contact resources that may be of benefit to anyone who is considering getting a pet for their child.
All right, well, I want to thank you. This has been a very informative show. This has been You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton. Thank you for watching.